And once again, welcome everyone. We're glad that you could be here. This is our first of 2025 in our Clean Buildings Performance Standard webinar series. And we're excited to be able to walk you through the exemption pathway for this first one. It's a topic that is uh, been asked a lot, and many folks have asked for more information, and so we're happy to walk through this with you. My name is Jeff Rasmussen. I am the Outreach and Education Program Manager here with the Clean Buildings team, and with me I have Dylan Ackerman, who's also on our team. You'll hear from him quite a bit today as he'll guide you through the exemption pathway. Behind the scenes, we have Luke Howard, James Witherington, and Judy Darst from our technical teams that'll be uh, answering some of your questions throughout the presentation. And so if you do have questions throughout this presentation, encourage you to put them in the Q&A, and our team will do our best to answer those for you. There will be time at the end of this presentation for some live Q&A, and we're happy to try to take your questions there. But as I mentioned earlier, some of these questions or this is a very technical topic, and so if we're not able to answer it in this setting here, we will definitely loop back with you. All right, Dylan, let's kick this off here. We can go to the next slide. There we go. All right, so as many of you know, we are part of commerce, and commerce touches many aspects and corners of communities in Washington State, everything from housing and homelessness to small business assistance, and of course, we are here in energy. And then our team, our clean buildings team, led by our managing director, Emily Salzberg. And then you can see there everyone that's part of our clean buildings team with the incentive program led by Josette Gates, along with Derek, Brittany, and Sam. Our data team, which has got a huge undertaking ahead of them, KJ and Michael. And then our technical assistance team led by Luke, along with Judy, Donnie, James. And if you've been working with the Clean Buildings program with us for a while, you've probably heard from one of these folks frequently or at some point. So, and then the programming compliance team led by Anna Lindbergen, along with myself, Dylan, and Robert. All right. So it looks like a very big agenda, and it is. I'm not going to lie. Um, but this is a topic that we get a lot of questions on, and I know folks are very curious about. So uh, we wanted to make sure that we brought this to you. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I lost my screen for a second. All right, Dylan, if we can go to the next slide here. All right. So refresher for some, maybe this is brand new for others, but Clean Buildings Performance Standard. This was part of the Clean Buildings Act, House Bill 1257, that passed legislation in 2019. And what this did is it set the ASHRAE Standard 100 2018 under WAC 19450 that set the administrative requirements for building efficiency in Washington State. Initially, it's categorized buildings 50,000 square feet or more, known as Tier 1. And then eventually in 2023, the law expanded to include Tier 2 buildings, which are buildings 20,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet, and then all multifamily buildings over 20,000 square feet. Through this process, Commerce was charged with tasks such as rulemaking, notifying building owners, administering incentives, and supporting mandatory compliance. Um, Compliance schedule. So internally, we refer to these as cohorts, but depending on the building size, the buildings may have a different compliance date. And so in this graphic here, it shows the different compliance dates for the different size buildings, starting with the tier one buildings over 220,000 square feet. The compliance date is June 1st, 2026. Uh, and then, of course, tier one buildings between 90 and 220,000 a year later. And then that same year in 2027, tier two buildings, again, buildings 20,000 to 50,000 square feet plus multifamily. And then the smaller cohort of the tier one buildings of 50,000 to 90,000 square feet. So be important to keep these dates in mind as Dylan's going through the exemption process. You'll want to know, depending on the size of your building, that also plays into the exemption deadline as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dylan to walk us through the exemption pathway.
Hi, everyone. I'll be going through those exemption pathways, requirements, and then the process for actually applying for exemptions. I'll start quickly with the compliance pathways for Tier 1, Tier 2 covered buildings. As we can see here, this is the compliance pathways for Tier 1 building owners. You'll see on that top left is the start, and there are three pathways for Tier 1 buildings, either meeting the EUIT path, achieving compliance via the investment criteria path, or third, that applying for an exemption certificate. And as you can see here, compliance by receiving an exemption certificate for Tier 1 building means that the given building will not be expected to comply by meeting the EUIT or through the investment criteria. Similarly, with the Tier 2 compliance pathway, buildings have two options for compliance. Either covered buildings either demonstrate compliance by doing the benchmarking and developing/implementing operations and maintenance programs and energy management plans. However, if these buildings apply and receive an exemption certificate, they will not be expected to benchmark energy use or develop and implement those plans and programs. To start with here on what the exemptions are that groups may apply for, there are a number of different criteria. I'll go into each one of these a little bit more at length, but just really quick summary. This is a list of the current exemption types, which are a building is less than 50% occupied, no certificate of occupancy over the last 12 months, less than 50% occupied, less than 50,000 square feet of conditioned space. More than 50% of the floor area is designated as factory group F or high hazard group H. If a building is an agricultural structure, buildings that are pending demolition, or buildings that are experiencing financial hardship. And we will go into each one of these a little bit more at length, but for all of these applications, it should be noted that if you have a Tier 1 building, you can apply for an exemption no sooner than 3 years prior to the compliance dates. And as Jeff showed you a little bit prior, if you have a Tier 1 building that is more than 90,000 square feet, that timeline has actually opened up. But if you currently have a building that is 50 to 90,000 square feet, they are not yet in the 3 years prior to the compliance date and can't yet submit an exemption application. Of note, these exemptions are valid for just one compliance cycle. The compliance cycles are every 5 years. So even if a building does receive an exemption certificate, it does not mean that it will be exempt forever, just for this one cycle. Similarly, with Tier 2 buildings, this list is mostly the same. only a couple small things to note. For tier 2 building to be exempt, less than 20,000 square feet of conditioned space, and all of those previously listed things. One other big difference with a tier 2 exemption is that the applications for exemptions may be submitted no sooner than 2 years prior to the compliance date. For all tier 2 buildings, the compliance date is July 1st of 2027, which means that 2 years prior will open up on July 1st of this year, 2025.
Come on. Go.
That was a question for a second. One thing to note, these applications, just like tier 1, must be submitted to Commerce no later than 180 days prior to the compliance date. All right, moving into actual exemptions here. These slides are a little bit wordy, but I'll try to cover the essence of what they're covering as well as an example for each type of exemption. So with unoccupied buildings, these are buildings that do not, or sorry, for certificate of occupancy, this is a building that does not have a certificate of occupancy or temporary certificate within a consecutive year, or for a consecutive year that's within 2 years prior to the compliance deadline. We have below here per normative annex section Z 4.1 partial exemptions. If the building is approved for this exemption, but still has a gross floor area that was occupied that's greater than 20,000 square feet, it still shall comply with the tier 2 covered building requirements for that occupied floor area. An example of this type of an exemption under the standard would be, say you had a building that just achieved occupancy, got their certificate of occupancy 8 months prior to the compliance date, and they lease their space immediately. They're in a position where they can't even get 12 consecutive months of energy use data, and they don't have a full year of consecutive occupancy. This building would be valid for exemption and would be able to get that. Unoccupied buildings, similarly, but a slightly different. These are buildings that did not have physical occupancy by the owner or tenant for at least 50% of the conditioned floor area. An example of this might be, say, a building that has the building is leased out to only 25% of the space for the year prior, and the other 75% is not leased and is vacant or is unoccupied. That would be an eligible exemption. However, this does not include building types. Say you have a building that is, say you have like an office building where on any given day, more than 50% of the occupants may be working remotely. That building is leased and occupied and would not be considered an unoccupied building under the standard. Just like I previously mentioned, if the occupied space in the building is greater than 20,000 square feet, it shall still comply with the tier 2 covered building requirements. Third, we have unconditioned and semi-conditioned spaces. If people have more questions about the exact definitions of unconditioned or semi-conditioned space, we can provide those answers in the chat. But buildings approved for this exemption are a building that does not have heating and cooling. An example of this might be an unconditioned warehouse or another space that is not directly heated or cooled. Just like the others, if the building is approved for this exemption but still has conditioned spaces greater than 20,000 square feet, it shall comply with the Tier 2 covered building requirements. And I have just a little example scenario of this, of a possible unconditioned space. So imagine that this is a building. My apologies, my art skills are not amazing, but say we have a building that's 160,000 square feet and 140,000 square feet is unconditioned. Well, just 20,000 square feet is conditioned. The building would qualify for a full exemption from the requirements because it is not above 20,000 square feet of conditioned space. Or, sorry, it's less than 50,000 square feet of conditioned space. Next exemption type here, manufacturing. This is for buildings that are more than 50% of the gross floor area is manufacturing or industrial purposes. These buildings would be considered exempt as long as they are able to demonstrate that more than 50% of that space is used and under the occupancy designations Group F or Group H. Once again, I want to note that if there is still, if that Tier 1 space still has greater than 20,000 square feet of non-exempt, non-manufacturing space, that non-exempt space would still be required to meet the Tier 2 building requirements. And an example of this manufacturing exemption would be right here. Let's say you have a 100,000 square foot manufacturing building. 90,000 square feet of that building is classified as occupancy group F, and the other 10,000 square feet is considered office. This would be an example where more than 50% of the space is manufacturing, and the Tier 1 covered building would qualify for a full exemption. Here's another example scenario. Let's say you had 75,000 square feet of factory group F and 25,000 square feet of office. It still meets the definition for an exemption because more than 50% of the GFA is manufacturing. However, the aggregate gross floor area of the non-exempt spaces is greater than 20,000 square feet. So that office portion of the space would still be expected to comply with Tier 2 building requirements. Next up, we have agricultural structures. In order to qualify for an exemption under the standard, you would show that the building is an agricultural structure. This includes barns, sheds, greenhouses, livestock, shelters, stables, grain silos, and under our definition, an agricultural structure is a structure designed and constructed to house farm implements, hay, grain, poultry, livestock, or other horticultural products, and is not a place used by the public or a place of human habitation where agricultural products are processed, treated, or packaged. Next up, we've got buildings that are pending demolition. If the building is pending demolition and its demolition date is prior to the compliance deadline, you can submit that right away and get an exemption for it. Or if you have, say, a building that's scheduled to be demolished after the current compliance deadline, but before the next compliance date, if you have a valid demolition permit, you would be eligible for an exemption for that pending demolition. And some of the logic there with the demolitions is if you have a building that is attempting to achieve compliance and showing energy efficiency and preventative maintenance work, that is not going to be useful if the building is currently planned for demolition. So we're trying to understand circumstances where a building owner is not going to, that building is not going to exist in the future. Next up, we have the financial hardship exemption. There are quite a few different qualifications for this. I'll just throw in a couple of these, but it can include anything from your evidence for a financial hardship exemption can be anything from a lien, documents showing financial distress, default, foreclosure, or a demonstration of an immediate and heavy financial need which cannot be satisfied from other available resources by events that are beyond control. So this is just a couple of the this is a list of the ways you could qualify for a financial hardship exemption. And now that we've covered a bunch of these exemptions, I kind of want to go into the actual process for applying for an exemption. This process, if you're imagining that flowchart from earlier, you don't have to go through as many steps. You start, and kind of your next step is getting access to the Clean Buildings portal and submitting your application. So after the application submission, there will be a commerce review, and I'll go into the outcomes of that commerce review and what that means for yourselves. Right. There are two ways to gain access to the Clean Buildings portal. The first way is by using the code that's found on your building owner notification letter. Or second, Commerce can grant you shared access. This can be provided by, Jeff has helpfully provided the link in the chat, but you can go to this form. Let's say you're an authorized representative. You can go to this form and provide the building details and get shared access to those buildings in the portal. Next, the building owners seeking exemption will use that portal to submit their application for an exemption certificate, and the steps under that form in the portal are confirming/editing building details, selecting the exemption reason, so any of those specific reasons that we discussed above, and finally providing supporting documentation for whichever exemption you applied for. That's a good segue into acceptable documents. Acceptable documents will be different for each type of exemption that you're applying for, but just a rough example of some of our accepted documents. We have municipal or county records, supporting documents that are authorized by a credentialed qualified person, construction permits, or other documentation from Commerce approved by Commerce, such as a letter from the local building department, as-built or permitted drawings that document/support the exemption reason. If you believe that you have other document types that may demonstrate your exemption, we welcome you to reach out to Commerce, and you can use a customer support ticket to reach out to us and maybe discuss what you have and if that would qualify as a supporting document. I also wanted to include, if you're applying for a financial hardship exemption, you could use any of those previously discussed documents, as well as things such as a tax lien sale list, notice of default, foreclosure, or denied application for utility programs, state programs, local funding programs like CPACER, or a denied application for a federal incentive. Next up, we have Commerce Review Outcomes. Once your application is submitted to Commerce, we will do a review, and a couple of those outcomes are listed below here, but we have pre-approval. Pre-approval is a provisional exemption status. So if you apply greater than 1 year prior to the scheduled compliance date, you won't get a straight up approval for exemption certificate, but you will get a pre-approval, and Commerce will follow up closer to the compliance deadline, and you'll recertify stating that your exemption reason still remains the same and in place. Next up, we have a straight up approval. This grants building owners an exemption certificate for that current compliance cycle. Commerce could also do a review and ask for more information. So if an application gets marked awaiting information, this means that Commerce has asked the owner for additional billing information or documents to support their exemption. This might be a situation where Commerce reaches back out to you after you submit your application and goes, all right, it looks like you have one acceptable document, but we're looking for something else. Or maybe there were some details missing that we didn't quite get enough information to make a decision on this. But we'll reach out to building owners to get that additional information needed. Additionally, a building owner can withdraw their exemption applications. And finally, there is denied. If an application for exemption is denied, the building owner is expected to demonstrate compliance in accordance with the CBPS requirements for their building. I also have some additional information here on denied applications. If your application is denied, you may request an administrative hearing after the denial of your application by submitting a request in a timely manner. And we have below some of the forms. We have the building, you'll need to submit the building ID that you want a hearing for, as well as the Annex Z, Forms A, B, and C. A couple common questions. I'll put a couple of these on for folks, but these are some questions that we receive often around exemptions, and some of these may apply to yourselves. First question is, are warehouses, churches, or nonprofits exempt? Under our standard, there are no specific exemptions to the Clean Buildings Performance Standard for warehouses, churches, or nonprofits. While they may qualify for one of the listed exemptions, none of these building types are automatically exempt from the standard. What about a historic building? Historic buildings are also not identified in the list of exemptions. While the Clean Buildings Performance Standard does have exceptions for the implementation of energy efficiency measures that would compromise historical integrity, historic buildings are not exempt from the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Finally, another question, what about building additions that are not yet complete? If you have a building addition that is in progress, you would need not comply if you have not had occupancy or a certificate of occupancy for at least 12 months prior to the compliance date. I can pass this on to Jeff to talk a little bit more about the support and resources that we have for building owners.
Excellent. Thanks, Dylan. And just before I jump into the building owner support, we've gotten a few questions in the Q&A. Some really good questions. So thank you, team, for answering those. But want to be able to loop back and continue answering questions here shortly. If we can go to the next slide, Dylan. So building owner support, whether we're talking about exemptions or compliance or whatnot, we've got a a really robust program out here to support you. We know that this clean buildings performance standards is pretty detailed and in depth, and we're here to support. And on your screen here, it shows some of the ways that we've continued to support, and um, the opportunities are still there. Everything from the building owner notifications, our clean buildings bulletins that come out usually every other week. If you're not signed up to receive those, uh, certainly you visit our website and sign up for those. It's some great information. Presentations like the one here today, whether it be virtual presentations or conferences and events, within our website, we've got a really robust guidance document library, as well as all our previous training videos um, that discuss the performance standards. And then we're, of course, the team is here to help. Introduced our team earlier, and very responsive. So if you do have unique questions or very generic questions specific to your building, we are here to help. And if it's easier, we're happy to meet virtually and walk through the specific scenario with you as well. We can move to the next one there, Dylan. All right. Continuing on with the no cost support, again, like I said, the Clean Buildings team. Fourth Tuesday of every month, we host Clean Building Performance Standard office hours. I know some folks on this call are attend that session each month, which is great. This is an opportunity for folks to come and ask specific questions to our Clean Buildings team, maybe walk through your scenario, or just hear from others that are going through the path of compliance as well. And before we leave today, I will put this in the chat, the links to that information. The utility accelerated programs, Dylan mentioned that one earlier. The Smart Building Center, Building Potential, has a free no cost help desk, and then the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And then, of course, you can always reach us at buildingsofcommerce.wa.gov with any questions or support. And then here are just a few of our upcoming events. Mentioned the office hours. And then next month, we will be hosting 2 webinars, Clean Buildings 101. So folks that are just starting to start the process or hearing of the process, this is kind of a basic high-level overview of what the building performance standards are and where to start. And then later in the month, we'll go over the connected building, campus level buildings compliance. And then in March is developing the EUIT for Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings. And we will, of course, be adding additional trainings in the coming months, but this is what's scheduled for the first quarter of 2025. All right. Perfect. So we do have some questions, and again, I appreciate the team that's on top of answering those questions in the Q&A. You do have the opportunity, if you want to feel comfortable coming in live and want to ask your questions, our team is here to help as well. So just raise that virtual hand and we'll of course bring you in. Dylan, one question that's here is, what about connected same meter buildings, one of which seems to qualify for an exemption? Can you exclude it if you have sub-metering for it?
Yes, if you
And
do have sub-metering for that connected building, that exempt building would not be expected to report under the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. That is only in there may be situations where a building is connected via an energy meter, and you may still have to report energy use rather than having to sub-meter. And I think there, I see the person who asked that, Katie. There may be some more details in that, and if you have additional information or details that might change the question, you can submit a customer support ticket. Some of these questions do just get a little bit detail oriented. Another question that I wanted to highlight, it looks like it got answered, but it was a good question and I didn't cover it, is if you have a partially exempt building, so a building that is exempt from the Tier 1 covered building requirements, but it's still required to meet Tier 2 reporting. The question that was asked was, when is the deadline for that building? That building from this point on would be considered would have to meet the Tier 2 covered building requirements, and its deadline would be the July 1st, 2027 deadline.
Excellent. And Dylan, another question that's just come in, asking for clarification on the exemption being, is it only temporary? The question goes on saying, and with Fish and Wildlife, we have a few shed buildings and farm buildings that have roof and are just for storage, around 200 or 22,000. Will we eventually have to have them meet these guidelines?
At this time, as it's written, the buildings would just be expected to resubmit an exemption, an application for exemption at the next, during the next compliance cycle, which would be in 5 years. So as it is currently written, agricultural buildings are exempt from the standard and just need to submit that application for exemption.
And Jeff, for clarification, did you say it just has a roof? It has no walls?
Let's see. It says buildings that have a
Yeah.
roof and are just for storage. So Danielle, I'm not sure if you can
So if
offer
it's
any additional insight on that.
This
well,
Yeah,
might,
if it's a
there's no
carp,
walls.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. I just wanted to state there's no walls. It's just for storage, just like a big structure. It's still in our building portal, but it's just an open structure with a roof.
Like a carport. If it doesn't have walls, it doesn't meet the definition of a building, and so it's
Oh.
not even covered. It wouldn't need to comply for an exemption. So
Oh, great.
that's the first thing, is to make sure that whatever your structure is meets the definition of a building.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
thank you, Judy, for catching that portion.
Oh,
Yes.
and if we have it as covered, we've notified you, then please communicate with us that that's the type of structure you have, and then we can fix that in the database.
Will do. Perfect. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I have a
Right.
question piggybacking off that.
Sure, go ahead.
So with general storage or industrial that has no heat, that wouldn't be covered in this, but if there is heat in it, it's considered semi-conditioned and would need to comply. Is that correct?
I'll take this one. So if it meets the definition of semi-heated, which I don't have right now, but can put in the chat in just a second, then it's unconditioned. So it's under 8, so I shouldn't talk from my memory. So that would be the exemption for the unconditioned or semi-conditioned. If you're using more heat than the definition of semi-heated, then it's considered conditioned.
So if we're using more than 8 BTUs for that
Here it
space,
is
it's
in the chat.
semi-conditioned.
Yeah, it aligns with the energy code of what semi-heated space is.
Gotcha.
Okay.
All right. Another question for the team. If you do not have a sub-metering for an agricultural or an industrial type building that is metered together with a clean building performance standard covered building, should an EUIT for the connected buildings be negotiated with Commerce?
I can.
take it.
Oh.
Yeah, if you're connected to by a single meter to buildings that may be exempt and some that are covered, you would either need to sub-meter out the exempt building in order to comply for the covered building to apply under the EUIT, the target pathway, or forego the sub-metering and just the covered building would comply through the investment criteria, which would include that level 2 audit and implementation of all cost-effective energy efficiency measures in accordance with standards. There are no targets for exempt buildings for the most part. There may be some. It is, but you know, depending on the scenario, it may be possible to comply at the connected building level, including an exempt building, but we would have to look at the specifics of the scenario, what kind of building activity type is in that exempt building, and what kind of exemption that it qualifies for.
All right, thank you, Luke. Oh. Dylan, I know you're in the process of answering this one from Eric, but wondering if we can bring it live here. Our main building is just over 50,000 square feet. At least 75% is used for manufacturing steel or structural steel, and it went away. We are adding a radiant heat to the shop. Would we still be eligible for an exemption?
Yes, you would still be eligible for an exemption as long as you can demonstrate that your building is more than 50% manufacturing or industrial occupancy. And I'll just put that back up on the screen there, but that is occupancy as defined by the Washington IBC as factory group F or high hazard group H. For the manufacturing or industrial exemption, heated or non-conditioned or non-conditioned status does not apply or matter.
Great.
So
So
what's defined as factory group F for industrial purposes?
Yeah, the definition, it lists dozens of different industrial processes. So you could go to the ICC digital codes. So if you do a search online for ICC digital codes, you can get read a copy online, a digital copy. Go to section 3. It defines all the different occupancy classifications and the different types of building activities considered under each occupancy classification.
Okay, great. We have a number of industrial buildings that are just above the 20,000 square foot threshold, but are 90% warehouse. So
yeah, you know, you
appreciate
might want to submit a ticket to Commerce. We can help you look at the specifics of it.
Okay, and that's through that link that was in there earlier, that Jeff, the smart sheet form.
Actually, this is going to be the customer support form that Judy put in. I'm going to copy and paste it in there again, so it brings it back to the top for everyone here.
Appreciate that.
You bet.
I did put a link to the ICC digital codes, including the section at chapter 3 that talks about where the codes are and the buildings that fall under each category.
Thank you.
It'll take me just a second to pull that, but Dylan, I'm not seeing any unanswered questions left in the Q&A, so really want to open it up. That I know folks have been chiming in, but you know, the formal invite to chime in with your questions here.
Meantime, thank you to the technical team. I see quite a few answered questions in the chat. I appreciate it.
All right. And I just put the customer support form in the chat for everyone again. So excellent. So just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded, still being recorded. As soon as we're done, we will capture all the recordings and the questions. And then my hope is, if not by tomorrow, then early next week, get those sent out to everyone for reference. And of course, if you do have additional questions that come up in the meantime, certainly use that support ticket and or email us at buildings.wad.gov. And I see someone asking about the office hours. So let me pull that for you real quick.
Hey, Jeff, do you happen to have the link to the building owner notification request? I know that's different than the support ticket, but that would be good to put in chat as well.
Yeah, of course.
Zach's asking the question, is there a way to look up the building ID number for a building? So you can submit a customer support ticket, but in this case, if you're looking to get access to the portal and everything for the buildings, you'd want to submit a building owner notification letter request. Just to note, those letters were sent out previously, and a lot of the data that came from the mailing address and all is from county assessor sites. So sometimes those addresses aren't great. So if you do have buildings that you know, please submit a ticket in and we can make sure we can link up with you and get you the information that you need.
Yeah, I also want to note that if you have a tier 2 building between 20 and 50,000 square feet, or any multifamily building over 20,000 square feet, we have not notified those building owners yet. So you would not have a building ID yet. Those notifications come out in June of this year.
Right. And I just put a couple links in the chat, one for the office hours and then the other for the owner notification form. So, and I'll make sure I include those in the follow-up email as well, just in case no one or just in case they're not captured here. They will be in the email as well. All right. Any additional questions? All right. Well, again, I appreciate everyone coming today. This has been a great discussion and a great topic. I know, again, one that many people are very interested in. So I hope this helps. And I hope that this gives some additional insight into the performance standards and how to comply. Really encourage anyone that if any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us either through email or the support ticket. And we're happy to walk through your specific scenario along with you. Hopefully you can join us for office hours next week on Tuesday. And then again, we'll be back next month with Clean Buildings 101. So until then, appreciate everyone's time and joining us today, and have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.